Black and white. Mr. Snake drummed his fingers across his chin. You don't look autistic. Jennifer stared at the coffee rings on the table between them. She wondered how many cups of undrunk coffee had gone to waste in this office. If he always said stupid things like that, any sane person would have to get up and leave before they punched him. She began to stand up. Mr. Snake had been avoiding looking directly at Jennifer, who avoided looking directly at him. Now he glanced up at her in a panic. He tried to laugh. You look great, really cool. Jennifer smoothed down her black skirt over striped black and white tights and tried to compose herself. She dearly wanted to wrench open the office door and run down the corridor screaming until she was out of the building. She'd tried that in the past, though, and it hadn't gone down very well. Jennifer remembered how much she hated the primary school she'd had to go to when she was 8, when she and her mum and dad had to move closer to Grandad. The playground had tall, spiky railings all the way round it and a gate that locked at 9 a.m. sharp. Locked in, trapped. It's to keep you safe, the teachers said. Jennifer had never felt less safe than when that gate was locked. The school front doors were shut, and the teacher closed the classroom door behind the last pupil to arrive. Walls within walls. She couldn't breathe. She needed to get out. Come on now, Mr. Snake was getting worried. Jennifer seemed to be shaking. He held out a hand to her. That wasn't a good idea. Before she knew what was happening, Jennifer had slapped his hand away with all her might and then brought her hand straight back across his face. Jennifer stared at Mr. Snake in horror. He was pressing his lips tightly together and his chin was wobbling. "Oh, my God," said Jennifer. "Please don't cry." She was 18 now, supposed to be a grown-up, but she couldn't deal with people crying. She knew you weren't meant to hit people, that was a mistake. But for goodness sake, if he said stupid things and then tried to touch her, what could he expect? It had taken a lot for her to come and see Mr. Snake, the head of year at the college. When she'd got her diagnosis from the hospital, her life started to make a bit more sense, to her at least. Autism, Asperger's, anxiety, all the A's, and you could throw in allergies and asthma, and then the OCD, fear, black and white, right and wrong. Jennifer liked black and white, and she knew right from wrong, but there are shades of colours on the spectrum. Here, now, in this office, felt very wrong. She was in the wrong again. Jim Jam Jen, they'd called her at primary school. After 6 months of refusing to go to school, the only way to avoid being prosecuted was for her mum to take Jennifer in, still wearing her pyjamas. That was the day she'd bitten the teaching assistant's hand. Mum was mortified. She knew it was only fear. Jennifer didn't mean it. It was a kind of survival instinct. But that's not how the teachers saw it. She ended up in the head's office, in her pyjamas. And when the head shut the door, the only thing Jennifer could think about was how to escape. That's when she made a bolt for it and ran. Mrs. McKendry was her saviour. Mrs. McKendry must have had a few words with the head, because Jennifer felt a bit safer for a while. She even stood up on stage at one point in an assembly, up in front of everyone, and in the audience she could see her mum with tears rolling down her face. That memory seemed a lifetime away. She'd never done anything like it before or since. If only she could find another Mrs. McKendry, a teacher who could be bothered, who even liked you, and most of all, a teacher who was honest with you. Jennifer often felt alone. She'd made a friend in Year 5, but that didn't last long. It was hard work sticking up for Jennifer when everyone else was against her. Beautiful Bella was everyone's favourite and led the Let's Make Fun of Jim Jam Jen games. So the friend became Bella's friend instead. Jennifer didn't blame her. She'd probably have done the same given the chance. She didn't like being lonely either. When Jennifer was little, there was that book, Emily the Strange, that was like a lifeline. Emily was strange, and so was Jennifer. She even looked a bit like her with that straight black hair and long black fringe. Jennifer knew she wasn't like other people, but if someone had made up a story about Emily the Strange, she couldn't be completely alone. Emily the Strange had fantastic adventures, and Jennifer was comforted by feeling she was having them too. Teachers had always been a problem for Jennifer. OK, so she was late for college sometimes, but obviously she was going to be late when the buses were so crowded. The thought of getting on a bus rammed with noisy teenagers sent Jennifer into a panic. So she'd have to wait for the next one, and then she'd be 10 minutes late. She tried her best to explain. If you want me to get there on time, you need to put more buses on. And that yellow card system isn't fair. It's not like I'm out drinking the night before and can't get out of bed. It's just that public transport is a real problem for some people, you know? For some reason, that line of argument didn't work very well. She still got a warning, and she'd be kicked out if she carried on being late. But that was before the diagnosis. You'd think a bona fide condition would be enough. But that's when Jennifer's hiding strategies worked just too well. It wasn't only Mr. Snake. Other students in her class would say, "Really? You don't look autistic. You mean you don't have empathy and that?" One of them even pulled a ridiculous clown face and said, "What do you think it means if I look like this?" Like they'd looked up autism in Wikipedia and suddenly they're the expert. So what was she supposed to look like, for God's sake? And what did they know about empathy? If they had any empathy, they wouldn't be so mean. Jennifer was fed up with being fed up with people. She was happy when she was with her dogs. 2 miniature Dachshunds, black and white, like Jennifer. They made her feel safe, and they didn't expect her to be anything but herself. When she was out walking, people would exclaim, "Oh, what cute little dogs," and come gushing over, but then the dogs would bark and make a massive scene, and people would back off. Good, thought Jennifer. She never wanted people crowding her. That's how she met Pedro. He liked her dogs, and he talked to them, not to her. Pedro liked the way they barked at everyone except him. He didn't like people much, so he, Jennifer, and the Dachshunds had something in common. Several minutes had passed. Jennifer had watched Mr. Snake as he turned several different colours, from crimson to very pale, a bit green, then pink. Now he was starting to look more normal, but there was a definite red mark on his right cheek. He straightened his face and took a deep breath. Jennifer waited for the inevitable. She would be suspended or expelled, obviously. When Jennifer left college later that day, she felt like she was walking on air. She couldn't wait to get home and tell her mum what had happened. She'd assaulted a teacher, and she wasn't proud of that. She'd done a very bad thing. There was no getting away from it, and Mum wouldn't be happy about that, no way. But what she hadn't accounted for was that Mr. Snake's boss was Mr. Snake's boss because she knew more about people like Jennifer than Mr. Snake did. Not that there were any other people like Jennifer, and that was the point. When Mr. Snake knocked on the head of student support's door and practically pushed Jennifer into the room, there, sitting at the desk, was her old ally, Mrs. McKendry. Mr. Snake was amazed. He had never seen Jennifer smile before, but before long she and Mrs. McKendry were beaming at each other. And as they talked, Jennifer felt all her pent-up emotions rising to the surface and tumbling out of her as tears, laughter, and a stream of sentences that she had never expressed before. After years of trying to fit in, trying so hard to work out how to behave, struggling to explain herself, and all the while hiding her autism from everyone, including herself, Jennifer was making sense. She was making sense because Mrs. McKendry wanted to understand. Jennifer had to make a full apology to Mr. Snake. When he'd calmed down, he even had to admit that he'd learned a thing or two after witnessing the ease with which Mrs. McKendry coaxed Jennifer to talk. Jennifer was glad. She shouldn't have hit him, like she shouldn't have bitten the teaching assistant at school. But now she was getting some help with that kind of thing, from someone who actually understood why she might behave like that in the first place. She and Pedro were making progress from talking to the dogs to talking to each other. And maybe now Mr. Snake would think twice before he put people in boxes and locked the lids.